The Ghostly Christmas Clue, a Poirot Hercule Mystery Part1. The Inviao and the Fioan. Fog lay thick over Whitehall that December morning, clinging to the lamps and railings like an unwelcome memory. London moved slowly beneath it, carriages muffled, footsteps softened, voices hushed. It was the sort of weather that invited reflection, secrecy, and the quiet resurfacing of old regrets. Hercule Poirot disliked fog. "It is untidy," he often said. "It hides what should be seen." He sat in his small but immaculate flat, perfectly upright in his chair, his breakfast tray arranged with mathematical precision before him. The silver teapot gleamed. The toast lay aligned. The newspaper was folded exactly once. Poirot's mustache his pride. His triumph had been groomed with exceptional care. He was in the act of sipping his chocolate when the knock came. 3 sharp taps. Measured. Hesitant, Poirot set down his cup. Entrez. The door opened to reveal a young woman, pale from the cold, her gloved hands clasping a sealed envelope, as though it were fragile or dangerous. "Monsieur Poirot?" she asked. "But of course," Poirot replied. "You have found him." She stepped inside, glancing around the room with the curiosity of someone who had heard many stories. "I was told you would be expecting letters," she said, placing the envelope on the small table. Poirot's eyes lingered on the wax-sealed Ashcroft Manor. He did not open it at once. Instead, he thanked the messenger, dismissed her, and sat very still. "Ah," he murmured. "So Christmas approaches." The letter. Poirot slit the envelope carefully and unfolded the thick, cream-colored paper inside. The handwriting was elegant, precise, yet heavy, each word pressed as though the writer feared it might escape. "Monsieur Hercule Poirot, I write to you in desperation and in hope. For 5 years, my family has lived beneath a shadow. We have endured whispers, strange occurrences, and a fear we no longer understand. This Christmas, that fear has returned stronger, clearer, and more determined than before. My brother, Henry Ashcroft, died in this house 5 years ago. His death was ruled an accident. But now we believe he has returned. I do not know whether I believe in ghosts, but I believe in truth. Please come to Ashcroft Manor before Christmas Eve. If you do not, I fear something terrible will happen. Yours sincerely, Lady Eleanor Ashcroft Poirot." Read the letter twice, then a third time. He folded it neatly and placed it beside his teacup. "A ghost," he said thoughtfully. "And at Christmas. How theatrical." Yet his eyes were thoughtful, not amused. Fear, Poirot knew, did not write letters like this without reason. Captain Hastings arrives. Captain Arthur Hastings arrived shortly after, bringing with him the cold air, a hint of cheer, and the faint smell of London streets. "Poirot, my dear fellow," Hastings exclaimed, "you look as though you've swallowed a riddle." Poirot handed him the letter. Hastings read it eagerly. "A haunted manor? A Christmas ghost? Splendid." Poirot frowned. "You find this amusing?" "Well, interesting at least." "Very Dickensian." Poirot shook his head. "Dickens, yes. But death, mon ami, is never seasonal." Hastings looked again at the signature. "Ashcroft Manor. I've heard of it. Old family. Very respectable." Poirot nodded. "Respectability is often a disguise, so we're going?" Hastings asked. Poirot stood and reached for his coat. "We are invited," he said, "and one does not refuse an invitation written in fear." The journey north, they left London 2 days later. The train carried them through frost-covered fields and villages wrapped in Christmas anticipation, garlands on station signs, pine branches tied with ribbon, distant bells echoing through the cold. Hastings watched the scenery with excitement. "I do love Christmas in the countryside," he said. Poirot stared out the window, observing the landscape as though it were already a puzzle. "Yes," he replied softly. "It encouraged nostalgia." And nostalgia, my friend, is dangerous. Dangerous? It convinces people that the past was kinder than it truly was. First glimpse of Ashcroft Manor. Ashcroft Manor rose from the snow like a memory that refused to fade. Tall, dark, imposing. Its stone walls bore the marks of age, its windows reflecting the pale winter sky. A single lantern burned at the entrance, its light flickering uncertainly. Poirot paused before stepping inside. "This house," he said, "does not want visitors." Lady Eleanor Ashcroft, Lady Eleanor, awaited them in the drawing room. She was a woman in her late 40s, dressed in mourning black despite the season. Her face was composed, but her eyes betrayed exhaustion. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, extending her hand. "Thank you for coming." Poirot bowed slightly. "Madame, when fear calls, I answer." Her lips trembled. "You believe me, then?" Poirot did not answer directly. "I believe," he said carefully, "that something here wishes to be heard." The house and its inhabitants. Poirot was introduced to the others. Edward Ashcroft, Henry's younger brother, nervous, sharp-eyed, restless. Sir Reginald Ashcroft, their uncle, rigid, authoritative, deeply concerned with reputation. Dr. Marcus Bell, the family physician, calm, controlled, observant. Miss Clara Whitcomb, Lady Eleanor's companion, quiet, watchful. Jonathan Reeves, the estate's legal advisor, polite, reserved, anxious. Poirot observed them all with polite interest. Every smile, every pause, every silence. This was not a house haunted by a ghost. That it was haunted by memory. The story of Henry Ashcroft. That evening, Lady Eleanor told Poirot the story. Henry had died 5 years earlier on Christmas Eve. He had fallen from the staircase in the east wing. It was declared an accident, she said. But ever since, the house has not been the same. Poirot leaned forward. And the ghost? She hesitated. Footsteps. Lights extinguished and relit. A figure once at the top of the stairs. Poirot's eyes sharpened. Once? Yes, but that was enough. Poirot's first thought later, alone in his room, Poirot stood by the window, watching snow fall against the dark. A ghost, he murmured. Or a reminder. He removed the letter from his pocket and read it once more. Christmas was coming, and with it truth. Part 2. Ashcroft MMR Ashcroft Manor did not sleep, even in daylight. It possessed a peculiar stillness, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. When night arrived, that stillness deepened into something heavier, something that pressed upon the mind. Hercule Poirot felt it at once. A house, he believed, absorbed the emotions of those who lived within it. Joy left warmth behind. Anger stained the air. And fear lingered longer than any other. Ashcroft Manor was saturated with fear. The morning after arrival, Poirot awoke early the following morning. He always did. Routine was a form of discipline, and discipline kept the mind sharp. He dressed with care and surveyed his room. It was large but sparsely furnished, the sort of guest chamber designed to impress without offering comfort. Heavy curtains blocked the pale winter light, and a faint smell of old wood and extinguished fires clung to the air. Poirot opened the curtains. The grounds lay before him, blanketed in snow. Bare trees stood like sentinels, their branches clawing at the sky. Somewhere in the distance, a bell tolled faintly, a village church welcoming the season. Christmas, Poirot murmured. A time for truth, or for pretending it does not exist. He straightened his tie and left his room. Breakfast observations. The family gathered in the dining room. Shortly after 8, Poirot took his seat at the long table, careful to note the arrangement. Lady Eleanor sat at the head, composed but pale. Sir Reginald occupied a place to her right, rigid as a carved statue. Edward Ashcroft sat opposite Poirot, fidgeting with his napkin. Dr. Bell and Jonathan Reeves conversed quietly, while Miss Whitcomb poured tea with precise movements. Conversation was polite. Too polite. Poirot listened more than he spoke. Edward laughed too loudly at an unremarkable comment. Sir Reginald corrected a servant sharply over a minor error. Lady Eleanor barely touched her food. Poirot noticed something else no one mentioned. Henry Ashcroft. Not once. Poirot explores the manor after breakfast. Poirot requested permission to walk through the house alone. Of course, Lady Eleanor said quickly. You are free to go anywhere. Her eagerness was revealing. Poirot began with the ground floor drawing rooms, libraries, unused parlors. Everywhere he went, the house seemed to whisper of former grandeur. Portraits lined the walls, generations of Ashcrofts, staring down with stern eyes. One portrait caught Poirot's attention. Henry Ashcroft. He was handsome, confident, his gaze direct, almost challenging. Poirot studied it carefully. A man who enjoys being heard, he said softly. Such men rarely die quietly. The staircase eventually. Poirot reached the east wing. The staircase curved upward in a graceful arc, polished wood gleaming beneath the light of tall windows. A decorative table stood near the base, adorned with Christmas ornaments, candles, ribbons, and a small silver angel. Poirot paused. The angel was charming in its simplicity. Too simple. He leaned closer, examining it without touching. Interesting. Henry single quotes. Death revisited later that afternoon. Poirot sat with Dr. Bell in the library. You were present when Henry Ashcroft died, Poirot said. Yes, Dr. Bell replied. I was called immediately. And you concluded it was an accident? Dr. Bell hesitated, a fraction too long. He fell, he said. A tragic misstep, Poirot nodded. Did he struggle? Dr. Bell stiffened. There were marks. But a fall can cause many things. Poirot smiled gently. Indeed, he said. And sometimes, so can fear. Miss Whitcomb speaks. That evening, Poirot found Miss Clara Whitcomb alone in the conservatory. She startled when she saw him. You do not believe in ghosts, she said suddenly. Poirot tilted his head. Do you? She looked down at her hands. I believe people see what they expect to see. Poirot nodded approvingly. And what do you expect to see here, mademoiselle? She whispered. The truth. The first night that night, the manor revealed its secret rhythm. Poirot lay awake in bed, his senses alert. The silence stretched, then broke. A sound. Soft, measured. Footsteps. They echoed faintly through the corridor, slow, deliberate, unmistakably real. Poirot rose quietly and opened his door. The hallway was empty. Yet, the footsteps continued moving away, toward the east wing. Poirot followed. The ghost walks as he reached the staircase. The air grew colder. A pale light flickered at the top of the stairs. Then a figure. White, still, watching. Poirot did not cry out. He observed. The figure stood for only a moment before vanishing into shadow. Poirot descended the stairs and examined the floor. No footprints. No disturbance. Only silence. Poirot thinks back in his room. Poirot sat at his desk and made notes. The ghost had been seen, but not felt. Fear was present. Belief was present. Evidence was absent. This ghost, Poirot murmured, is very careful. Morning after, the household buzzed with agitation. The next morning. Edward was pale. Sir Reginald furious. Lady Eleanor shaken. You saw it too? Edward asked Poirot eagerly. Yes, Poirot replied calmly. And I saw nothing that defied reason. Edward stared at him. Poirot's private conclusion later. Poirot spoke quietly to Hastings. This house is not haunted, he said. Then what did we see? Poirot smiled faintly. A performance. The seed of doubt as Christmas Eve approached. Fear grew stronger. And Poirot knew. The ghost was only the beginning. Someone wanted the past to remain buried. And someone else was afraid it would not. Part 3. The Ghost APPRS Christmas. Eve arrived beneath a sky heavy with cloud and snow. Ashcroft Manor seemed to draw inward as the day progressed, as though the ancient house itself sensed what the night would bring. Hercule Poirot noticed the change immediately. Voices were softer, footsteps quicker, doors closed more firmly than before. Fear, he observed, had finally found its moment. Christmas Eve at Ashcroft Manor, the house was decorated with careful restraint. Holly adorned the banisters, candles glowed softly along the walls, and a modest Christmas tree stood. In the drawing room, its ornaments chosen more out of tradition than joy, Lady Eleanor supervised the arrangements. With mechanical precision, it must look normal, she said more than once. Poirot, seated nearby, raised an eyebrow. Normal, he repeated softly. A curious word, madame. She did not answer. A tense dinner that evening was a strained affair. Edward Ashcroft barely ate, his eyes darting toward the doorway each time a draught caused the candles to flicker. Sir Reginald attempted conversation but failed repeatedly. His irritation barely concealed. Dr. Bell drank more wine than usual. Poirot noticed. Miss Whitcomb sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, listening intently. The clock on the mantel chimed 9. Edward flinched. "Does it always sound so loud?" he asked. Poirot smiled gently. "Time," he said, "has a habit of announcing itself when one is afraid of it." The story of the ghost. After dinner, the family gathered in the drawing room. At Poirot's suggestion, Lady Eleanor finally spoke openly. "It always happens late," she said. "Near midnight. What happens?" Hastings asked. "The footsteps, the light, the figure." Poirot leaned forward. "And always in the same place?" "Yes," she whispered. "The East Wing staircase." Poirot nodded. "Consistency," he murmured. "The friend of truth or of deception." Waiting for midnight as the clock crept toward 11. Tension filled the room. Sir Reginald insisted the servants retire early. Only the family, Poirot and Hastings, remained awake. The fire crackled. Outside, snow began to fall more heavily. Poirot checked his watch. "Soon," he said. Edward swallowed hard. "You think it will happen again?" Poirot met his gaze. "I am certain of it." The first sign at exactly 11:30. The house shifted. A faint draft passed through the room, extinguishing one of the candles. Miss Whitcomb gasped. Then a sound. Footsteps. Slow, measured. Ascending. Poirot rose quietly. "Remain here," he said, "and do not panic." Hastings followed despite himself. The East Wing corridor. The corridor was dark, lit only by moonlight filtering through tall windows. The footsteps continued steady, deliberate. Poirot observed the sound carefully. Not random. Time. He stopped abruptly. The footsteps stopped too. Poirot smiled faintly. "The ghost reveals itself at the top of the staircase." A pale glow appeared. Then a figure emerged. Tall, white, motionless, its form shimmered faintly, as though made of mist and moonlight. Edward cried out behind them, "My God!" "Henry!" The figure turned slightly. Poirot noted the movement. Very human. The ghost raised one arm slowly and pointed downward. Then the light flickered. The figure vanished. Chaos screams echoed through the manor. Servants rushed from their quarters. Lady Eleanor collapsed into a chair, trembling. Sir Reginald demanded answers. Poirot remained calm. "Interesting," he murmured. Poirot investigates immediately, ignoring the panic. Poirot moved swiftly to the staircase. He examined the banister, the floor, the walls. Nothing disturbed, but Poirot was not disappointed. He had not expected carelessness. The lantern near the top of the stairs. Poirot noticed a lantern mounted on the wall. It was warm, recently lit. He smiled. "A ghost who needs light," he said softly. "How modern." The family's reaction. Edward was inconsolable. It was him, he insisted. I know it was. Poirot studied him closely. Fear or guilt? Lady Eleanor refused to leave her room. Dr. Bell insisted on calming drafts. Poirot declined. I prefer clarity, he said. Hastings questions Poirot later that night. Hastings cornered Poirot. You saw it, he said. You must admit it was convincing. Poirot nodded. Extremely. And yet? And yet, Poirot replied. Convincing is not the same as impossible. Poirot's private test before retiring. Poirot returned alone to the East Wing. He extinguished the lamps. Then he waited. Minutes passed. Then a faint click. Poirot smiled in the darkness. The second appearance. The light returned briefly. Poirot stepped forward suddenly. The light vanished at once. Too quickly. Aha, Poirot whispered. You are afraid of being seen, but not of being believed. A calculated performance. Back in his room, Poirot wrote extensively. The ghost appeared only when watched. Only at specific times. Only in specific places. It was not haunting the house. It was communicating. The hidden purpose. Poirot considered Henry Ashcroft. A man who threatened. A man who knew secrets. A man silenced on Christmas Eve. The ghost was not Henry. It was Henry's message, twisted by someone else. Morning. After the haunting Christmas morning dawned gray and silent. The household was exhausted. Poirot, however, was energized. The ghost has done its job, he told Hastings. And what job is that? Poirot smiled. To remind everyone of the night Henry died. Poirot's silent conclusion. As the family gathered, Poirot watched them carefully. Fear had sharpened. Masks were slipping. The ghost had succeeded. But now, it was Poirot's turn. Part 4. The broken WAT morning light entered Ashcroft Manor reluctantly, as though the house itself resisted awakening after the terrors of the night before. Christmas morning should have brought warmth, bells, and laughter. Instead, it delivered silence, thick, uneasy silence that clung to every corridor. Hercule Poirot welcomed it. Silence, he believed, was when truth grew impatient. A house after fear. The servants moved quietly, their eyes lowered, voices hushed. Breakfast was served later than usual, and when the family finally gathered, no one spoke of celebration. Edward Ashcroft looked as though he had not slept. His hands trembled when he lifted his cup. Lady Eleanor arrived last. She wore black once more, her face pale but composed with visible effort. Sir Reginald cleared his throat sharply. This nonsense ends today, he declared. There will be no more talk of ghosts. Poirot observed him carefully. Men who insisted most loudly on order, he knew, were often the ones most afraid of chaos. Poirot requests Henry's effects after breakfast. Poirot turned politely to Lady Eleanor. Madame, he said, I should like to see your brother's personal belongings. Her fingers tightened around her gloves. Is that necessary? Essential, Poirot replied gently. Objects remember things that people forget. She hesitated, then nodded. They are kept in his study, untouched. Of course, Poirot murmured. Untouched, yet never forgotten. Henry Ashcroft's study. Henry's study lay at the far end of the East Wing. The door creaked softly as Lady Eleanor opened it, as though protesting the disturbance. The room was heavy with dust and restraint. Bookshelves lined the walls, legal volumes, ledgers, correspondence. A large desk sat near the window, its surface meticulously arranged. Frozen in time, Poirot stepped inside slowly. A man who valued control, he observed. Lady Eleanor stood rigid by the door. He insisted the room remain as it was. Poirot nodded. Because change would admit loss. The desk. Poirot examined the desk carefully, pens aligned, papers stacked precisely. A drawer partially open. Inside lay several personal items, letters, a signet ring. A folded handkerchief and a pocket watch. Poirot lifted it carefully. The watch was elegant, gold-plated. Engraved with Henry Ashcroft's initials. It was stopped. Poirot turned it over. The time was frozen. At 11:47. Time does not. Poirot's eyes sharpened. He pressed the winding mechanism. Nothing. He shook it gently. Still nothing. Poirot placed the watch on the desk. Tell me. Madame, he said quietly, was this watch ever repaired? Lady Eleanor swallowed. No. Was it functioning before Henry's death? Yes, she said at once. Perfectly. Poirot nodded slowly. Then this watch stopped because it was forced to stop. Dr. Bell's explanation. Dr. Marcus Bell joined them shortly after, summoned by Poirot. The watch? Dr. Bell said, glancing at it. A fall could easily damage such a mechanism. Could, Poirot agreed. But must it? Dr. Bell hesitated. I don't follow. Poirot leaned closer. Doctor, he said, what stops a watch more effectively than impact? Dr. Bell frowned. A sudden shock? Poirot smiled faintly. Or, he said softly, a struggle. The autopsy question. Poirot seated himself opposite Dr. Bell. You examined Henry Ashcroft's body, he said calmly. Yes. And you concluded his death was accidental? Yes. Poirot's gaze did not waver. Doctor, he asked, did Henry have bruising on his wrists? Dr. Bell stiffened. There were marks, he admitted. Consistent with falling. Poirot nodded. And his neck? Dr. Bell's fingers tightened. There was swelling, he said carefully. But again, Poirot raised a hand. Enough, he said. I understand. Poirot's reconstruction. Silent, in his mind. Poirot saw it clearly. Henry at the top of the staircase. Angry, threatening. A confrontation. Hands grabbing. A watch striking wood. Time stopping. 11:47. Poirot closed his eyes briefly. Interesting, he murmured. Edward Ashcroft breaks silence later that afternoon. Edward confronted Poirot in the library. You think my brother was murdered, he said. Poirot studied him. Do you? Edward hesitated. I don't know. Poirot nodded. Uncertainty, he said, is the beginning of honesty. Edward's voice dropped. Henry planned to reveal something. On Christmas Eve. Poirot leaned forward. And you knew this? Edward nodded slowly. Yes. The threat Edward spoke in fragments. Henry had uncovered financial irregularities. Old documents. False accounts. He said he would expose everything. Edward whispered. Poirot watched him carefully. And how did that make you feel? Edward looked away, terrified. The staircase revisited as dusk fell. Poirot returned to the staircase alone. The silver angel still sat on the decorative table, its polished surface catching the fading light. Poirot examined it closely. There were faint marks on its wings, barely visible. He did not touch it. Not yet. Time, as a weapon back in his room. Poirot placed the watch on the table. 11:47. Not midnight. Not the ghost's hour. Earlier. A time when witnesses might still be awake. A time when silence would matter. Poirot smiled slightly. The killer, he said softly, wanted confusion, not darkness. A dangerous detail. Poirot wrote late into the night. The watch had stopped suddenly. The injury suggested restraint. The fall alone was insufficient. The ghost was distraction. Time was the key. Poirot shares with Hastings. Hastings listened intently as Poirot explained. So the watch proves it wasn't an accident? It proves, Poirot replied, that Henry did not fall alone. And the ghost? Poirot smiled. The ghost exists to make us forget the watch. The calm before revelation. Snow began to fall. Again, Christmas lights flickered softly through the windows. Poirot looked once more at the watch. 11:47. Small detail, he said. But small details are never innocent. Part 5. The false ing. The illusion of ghosts survives only as long as fear is allowed to breathe. Hercule Poirot knew this well. And on the morning after Christmas Day, he intended to suffocate it completely. A change in the air. Ashcroft Manor awoke to a brittle stillness. Snow lay thick against the windows, muting sound and motion alike. The servants whispered of the ghost no longer. Fear, once loud and theatrical, had grown cautious. Fear, Poirot knew, had begun to suspect. It was being watched. He welcomed this. Poirot observes the servants. Poirot spent the early hours doing something the family considered peculiar. He watched the servants. Mrs. Halley polished the banister repeatedly, always pausing at the same point. Thomas, the footman, avoided the east wing entirely. Lucy, the maid, crossed herself whenever she passed the staircase. None of them feared the ghost. They feared being blamed for it. Jonathan Reeves returns. Jonathan Reeves arrived shortly before noon, stamping snow from his boots and smiling too widely. "My dear Poirot," he said cheerfully, "I trust the haunting has behaved itself?" Poirot smiled politely. "On the contrary," he replied. "It has been most cooperative." Jonathan laughed, but his eyes flicked briefly toward the staircase. Just for a moment. Poirot's quiet test. Poirot invited Jonathan to walk with him through the east wing. "Tell me," Poirot said casually, "you have stayed here often?" "Many times," Jonathan replied. "I know the house well." "Ah," said Poirot. "Then you know which floorboard creaks." Jonathan hesitated. Poirot stopped walking. "So," he said softly, "do ghosts learn architecture? Or do men?" The first discovery. Poirot bent down near the base of the staircase. Behind a decorative panel, he revealed a thin copper wire. Jonathan's smile faltered. "That is odd," Poirot remarked. "Very odd." He followed the wire with his eyes. It led upward, the lantern mechanism with careful movements. Poirot uncovered a concealed lantern bracket hidden behind velvet drapery. When lit, the lantern would cast elongated shadows, twisted, human-like, onto the walls. A ghost, created by light and fear. Remarkable craftsmanship, Poirot said calmly. Jonathan said nothing. "Hastings understands." Captain Hastings stared in disbelief. "You mean the ghost was just light?" Poirot nodded. "Light, movement, timing," he replied. "Fear does the rest." "And the footsteps?" Poirot tapped the floor. "Weighted shoes, lifted on a pulley." Hastings exhaled sharply. "But why?" "Poirot calls the family." That evening, Poirot requested everyone assemble in the drawing room. The fire burned low. Shadows danced uneasily across the walls. Poirot stood before them, hands folded. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, "I regret to inform you, the ghost does not exist." Gasps followed. Lady Eleanor stiffened. Edward looked relieved. Sir Reginald scowled. The demonstration. Poirot turned to Jonathan Reeves. "Perhaps," he said pleasantly, "you would assist me?" Jonathan's face paled. Poirot pulled a cord. The lantern ignited. A tall, wavering shadow rose along the staircase wall, exactly as described on Christmas Eve. Lucy screamed. Poirot extinguished the light. "An illusion," he said. "Nothing more." Jonathan confesses. Jonathan sank into a chair. "Yes," he admitted hoarsely. "I staged it." Silence filled the room. "But why?" Edward demanded. Jonathan rubbed his face. "To distract you," he said. "To keep everyone afraid." "Of what?" Poirot asked gently. Jonathan swallowed. "Of the truth. The real motive," Jonathan explained. Henry Ashcroft had been investigating forged documents, false investments, money siphoned quietly for years. "He threatened to expose it," Jonathan said. "I helped cover it up." "But you did not kill him," Poirot said calmly. Jonathan looked up sharply. "No," he said. "I swear it," Poirot nodded. I believe you. A dangerous misunderstanding. Lady Eleanor spoke suddenly. So the ghost was a lie, she said. Then Henry truly fell. Poirot turned to her. Madame, he said softly, the ghost was a lie. But the fall was not. Her face drained of color. Poirot's reasoning. Poirot paced slowly. The ghost was created to confuse timelines, he explained. To make you believe Henry died at midnight. To separate the crime from the truth. He held up the pocket watch. But time, he said, does not cooperate with lies. The family reacts. Edward looked horrified. You're saying someone used the ghost to hide murder? Poirot nodded. Precisely. Jonathan stared at the floor. I never meant, Poirot interrupted gently. You meant distraction, he said. Not death. The ghost loses power that night. The manor felt different. No whispers. No shadows. No fear. The ghost, once exposed, had vanished forever. But Poirot knew the danger was not over. Removing fear only made guilt louder. Poirot's private conclusion. Back in his room, Poirot wrote, the haunting was real only because someone needed it to be. The murderer did not fear ghosts. The murderer needed one. He closed his notebook. Soon, he murmured, the ghost will point to its creator. A silent warning before sleeping. Poirot placed the pocket watch beside the silver angel ornament. Time and decoration, both innocent. Both weaponized. Someone in the house knew this. Part 6. Silent obsession. Once the ghost was destroyed, Ashcroft Manor did not grow peaceful. It grew dangerous. For fear, when it has no costume left, turns inward and begins to betray itself. Hercule Poirot understood this well. He had seen it in courts, salons, drawing rooms, and prisons across Europe. And now, he saw it here. The calm that was not calm. The morning after Jonathan Reeves's confession dawned bright and cold. Snow glittered outside the tall windows, and the manor looked almost innocent beneath its white covering. Inside, however, tension sat like an invisible guest at every table. No one spoke of the ghost anymore. No one needed to. Its absence screamed louder than its presence ever had. Poirot changes his tactics. Poirot announced that he would conduct no further questioning. This announcement unsettled everyone. Those who are innocent, he knew, long for questions, because questions offer release. Those who are guilty dread silence, because silence listens. Poirot became silent. Lady Eleanor under observation. Lady Eleanor Ashcroft took longer than usual to descend the staircase that morning. She paused halfway, her hand gripping the banister tightly. Poirot noticed. She never looked down. Once. Psychological detail. Poirot made a note. Fear of a place often signals memory, not superstition. Lady Eleanor avoided the staircase, not because she believed it haunted, but because she knew exactly what had happened there. Edward Ashcroft's restlessness. Edward attempted conversation poorly. He laughed at the wrong moments, spoke too quickly, drank too much coffee. Poirot watched him stir his cup again and again, long after the sugar had dissolved. Nervous energy, Poirot thought, or rehearsed fear. Dr. Bell's hands. Poirot observed Dr. Bell during lunch. The man's posture was controlled, his voice steady, but his hands betrayed him. They trembled only when Henry's name was mentioned. Poirot leaned slightly toward Hastings. The hands, he murmured. They remember what the mouth denies. The library. Experiment. Poirot invited the family to the library under the pretense of reviewing documents. He placed Henry's pocket watch on the documents. Table 11:47. He said nothing. Silence stretched. Lady Eleanor's eyes flicked to the watch. Edward swallowed hard. Dr. Bell adjusted his collar. Poirot smiled inwardly. Poirot speaks just enough. Interesting, Poirot said casually. How a small object can dominate a room. No one replied. And yet, he continued, it is not the watch that frightens you. He looked directly at Lady Eleanor. It is the moment it remembers. Lady Eleanor's control slips. Her voice was calm, but her hands clenched. You are implying things, she said. Poirot nodded politely. I imply nothing, he replied. I observe. Observation, Poirot knew, was accusation without cruelty. The staircase at noon. Poirot asked the servants to clean the staircase thoroughly. Then he asked them to stop. Halfway. Dust remained in the corners. Marks appeared. Faint scuffs. Pressure marks on the banister. Poirot knelt. 2 sets of hands, one pulling, one resisting. The reconstruction begins in Poirot's mind. Henry stood there, angry, confident. Someone blocked his path. Words escalated. A grip on the wrist. A struggle. The watch struck wood. 11:47. Poirot tests Edward. Poirot met Edward alone later that afternoon. You loved your brother? Poirot asked. Edward hesitated. Yes. Poirot nodded. And yet you feared him. Edward's silence answered. Fear, Poirot said gently, does not make killers, but it feeds them. Edward looked up sharply. I didn't kill him, he said. Poirot smiled. Kindly, I did not say you did. The weight of guilt. Edward slumped. I knew something would happen, he whispered. I said nothing. Poirot leaned forward. Silence, he said softly, is often guilt's first accomplice. Dr. Bell confronted quietly. Poirot walked with Dr. Bell in the garden. You signed the autopsy report quickly, Poirot remarked. It was clear. Dr. Bell replied. Clear, Poirot repeated. But incomplete. Dr. Bell stopped walking. You knew, Poirot said. And you chose not to see. Dr. Bell's voice cracked. I didn't want scandal. Poirot nodded. Nor did the killer. The Silver Angel revisited that evening. Poirot examined the Silver Angel again. The rope marks were undeniable. Now a decorative object repurposed. He did not accuse. He waited. Because killers, when cornered by silence, speak to escape it. Poirot's internal verdict that night. Poirot, the murderer, is not impulsive. The murderer is protective. The murderer believes the crime was necessary. He closed the notebook. Justification, he murmured, is guilt's favorite disguise. A crack appears near midnight. Poirot heard footsteps. Soft, careful. Someone stood near the staircase. Poirot did not move. A faint sob echoed. Poirot smiled sadly. The truth approaches. The ghost was gone. The illusion shattered. What remained was raw humanity, fear, regret. Love twisted into violence. Poirot knew now, not just who did it, but why. Part 7. The trick are revealed when the mind is ready to accept the truth. The truth no longer needs to shout. It only needs to be arranged. Hercule Poirot understood this better than any man alive. And on the evening of December 27th, he arranged everything. The invitation. Poirot requested that everyone assemble in the drawing room after dinner, not as an interrogation, not as an accusation, as a clarification, he said politely. The word unsettled them more than any threat could have. Drawing room. The fire burned steadily. Shadows clung to the corners of the ceiling. The snow outside reflected moonlight like a pale mirror. Lady Eleanor sat rigidly on the sofa. Edward stood near the mantel, unable to remain seated. Dr. Bell positioned himself carefully beside the window. Jonathan Reeves remained silent. His earlier confidence gone. Captain Hastings observed from Poirot's side. Poirot stood alone. Centered. Balanced. Poirot begins gently. Madame et messieurs, Poirot began calmly. You have all been afraid of the wrong thing. No one spoke. You feared a ghost, he continued. But the ghost was only a costume. Poirot paused. The real danger, he said softly, has been among us the entire time. The nature of the trick. Poirot turned toward the staircase. A good trick, he explained, depends on timing, attention, and belief. He raised Henry Ashcroft's pocket watch. This watch stopped at 11:47 p.m. He set it on the table. That is not the hour of ghosts, Poirot said. It is the hour of people. The first logical thread. Poirot paced slowly. If Henry fell accidentally, he said, there would be chaos, noise, witnesses, confusion, but there was none. He stopped because someone ensured there would be none. The ghost's purpose. Poirot looked at Jonathan Reeves. You created the ghost, he said calmly. Jonathan nodded. Defeated, to move attention, Poirot continued. To create midnight fear. He turned to the others. So when we remember Henry's death, we remember darkness, not time. Lady Eleanor speaks. This proves nothing, Lady Eleanor said sharply. Poirot inclined his head. On the contrary, he replied. It proves intention. Her composure cracked for the briefest moment. The staircase demonstration. Poirot requested everyone move to the staircase. Reluctantly, they obeyed. Poirot stood halfway up. Stand where Henry stood, he instructed Hastings. Hastings hesitated. Poirot nodded. Reassuringly, trust me. The physical truth. Poirot placed the silver angel ornament on the banister table. Observe, he said. He looped a thin rope around the angel's wing. Perfectly aligned. The rope tightened. The angel did not move. A decorative object, Poirot said. Converted into an anchor. Reconstructing the murder. Poirot's voice grew precise. Henry argued here, he said. He was blocked. Poirot stepped closer to Hastings. A rope was looped quickly, he demonstrated. A sudden pull. Hastings stumbled slightly. The watch struck the banister, Poirot continued. Time stopped. Poirot released the rope. Gravity finished what fear began. The reaction. Edward gasped. Dr. Bell turned pale. Lady Eleanor closed her eyes. The truth had entered the room. The medical confirmation. Poirot turned to Dr. Bell. The bruising, he said. The swelling. Dr. Bell swallowed. Consistent with restraint, he whispered. Poirot nodded. And not a fall. The psychological trap. Poirot returned to the drawing room. The killer, he said calmly, did not panic. They planned. They loved the house. They believed they were protecting it. His eyes moved slowly to Lady Eleanor. Lady Eleanor cracks. You think I killed my brother, she said coldly. Poirot shook his head gently. No, he replied. I think you believed you had no choice. Her breath caught. Why the ghost was necessary. Poirot continued. A loving killer cannot endure the truth. So you needed a story, he said softly. A ghost, a curse, anything but yourself. Lady Eleanor's hands trembled. The unspoken confession silence thickened. Poirot did not accuse. He waited. Because confession, when earned, is more powerful than force. Edward breaks down. She didn't mean to, Edward cried suddenly. He threatened everything. Poirot closed his eyes briefly. The truth had found its voice. Poirot's final observation. Poirot spoke gently. The trick, he said, was not the ghost. The trick was convincing yourselves that love could excuse murder. The end of the illusion. Lady Eleanor rose slowly. I only wanted him silent, she whispered. He would destroy us. Poirot bowed his head. Silence, he said softly, is the most dangerous weapon of all. Part 8. The Christmas Decoration. Truth, once spoken aloud, does not shout. It trembles. The drawing room of Ashcroft Manor felt smaller now, as though the walls themselves had leaned inward to listen. Lady Eleanor Ashcroft stood motionless near the fireplace. The silver angel ornament lay on the table between her and Hercule Poirot, its polished surface reflecting the firelight like a quiet Accusation. No one spoke. Poirot allowed the silence to work. The weight of the angel. Poirot lifted the silver angel carefully, almost tenderly. A Christmas decoration, he said softly. A symbol of peace. He turned it slightly. And yet, he continued, peace is often what people kill for. Lady Eleanor's breath shuddered. Edward stared at the ornament as if seeing it for the first time. Poirot explains the final detail. This angel, Poirot said, was placed here long before the night Henry died. He tapped the worn edge of one wing. These marks, he said, are not from decoration. They are from pressure, from rope. Dr. Bell closed his eyes. Jonathan Reeves looked away. Why a decoration? Poirot continued calmly. A weapon must not look like a weapon, he said, especially in a house full of memories. A knife would accuse. A rope would alarm. But a Christmas ornament? It disarms suspicion. Lady Eleanor whispered, I didn't plan it that way. Poirot nodded. No, he said gently. You planned it as necessity. Lady Eleanor speaks. Her voice was barely audible. He came to me that night, she said. He was furious. She took a step forward, gripping the back of a chair. He said he would expose everything. The accounts. The debts. The family name. Edward shook his head slowly. He would ruin us, she continued. On Christmas. Poirot listened, without judgment. Poirot did not interrupt. Confession, he knew, must unfold at its own pace. I begged him, Lady Eleanor said, to wait, to reconsider. He laughed. Tears streamed freely now. He said truth mattered more than family. The moment on the staircase, Poirot's voice was quiet, and then? Lady Eleanor closed her eyes. I followed him, she whispered. To the staircase. He turned. We argued. Poirot nodded. And the angel? Her voice broke. I grabbed what was there. The fatal choice, Lady Eleanor continued, trembling. I looped the rope around the wing. I only wanted to stop him. Her hands shook violently. He pulled away. The rope tightened. Poirot closed his eyes briefly. And gravity, he said softly, did the rest. The watch falls, Edward whispered. The watch. Yes, Poirot said. It struck the banister. Time stopped. 11:47 p.m. Not a ghost's hour. A human one. After the fall, I screamed, Lady Eleanor said. But no one came. She looked up, broken. So I did what desperate people do. I cleaned. I waited. I prayed. Poirot's expression softened. And then, he said, the ghost was born. Jonathan's role revisited. Jonathan Reeves spoke hoarsely. She came to me, he admitted. She was terrified. She asked me to help distract attention. Poirot nodded. The haunting, he said, was never about fear. It was about time. Edward's guilt. Edward collapsed into a chair. I knew, he whispered. I suspected, but I said nothing. Poirot turned to him gently. Silence, he said, does not protect the innocent. It only shelters guilt. Edward buried his face in his hands. Poirot's moral truth. Poirot addressed them all. This was not a crime of greed, he said, nor cruelty. It was a crime of love twisted by fear. Lady Eleanor looked up. Does that matter? She asked. Poirot met her gaze. To the law, he said. No, to the truth, he added softly. Yes, the angel's final meaning. Poirot placed the silver angel back on the table. Christmas decorations, he said, are meant to remind us of mercy. But mercy, he continued, cannot erase consequence. The fire crackled. Snow fell silently outside. Acceptance, Lady Eleanor straightened slowly. I will tell the authorities everything, she said. Poirot bowed his head. That, he replied, is the last gift you can give your brother. A house without illusions that night. Ashcroft Manor felt empty, not haunted, not cursed, simply human. The ghost was gone. The truth remained. Part 9. The final CONFRONTION truth rarely ends a story. It only changes its direction. The confession had drained Ashcroft Manor of its last illusion. Yet the air remained heavy, not with mystery now, but with consequence. The ghost was dead. Fear no longer wandered the halls. What remained was the quiet, inescapable presence of justice. And justice, unlike ghosts, does not fade when the lights are turned on. Morning, without mercy, dawn arrived cold and uncelebratory. Christmas decorations still hung in place, their cheer now painfully ironic. The silver angel remained on the table in the drawing room, untouched, as if no one dared move it again. Lady Eleanor sat alone, hands folded, posture composed but eyes hollow. She did not cry anymore. Grief, Poirot knew, eventually exhausts tears and leaves only acceptance. Poirot writes the truth. Poirot spent the morning writing every detail, every contradiction, every silence. He wrote not for the police, but for truth itself. Because truth, once clearly written, cannot be argued with. It can only be obeyed. Captain Hastings watched quietly. "You don't sound triumphant," Hastings said gently. Poirot did not look up. "There is no triumph," he replied. "Only accuracy." The arrival of the law, the sound of tires crunching on snow, broke the stillness. Inspector Harold Finch arrived just after noon. A tall man, stern-faced, carrying the weight of authority without ceremony. Poirot greeted him politely. "Inspector," he said. "Thank you for coming." Finch glanced at the manor. "So," he said, "the ghost story ends." Poirot nodded. "Yes," he replied. "And the human one begins." The formal statement. Lady Eleanor did not resist. She repeated her confession calmly, clearly, without embellishment. Inspector Finch listened in silence. Edward stood nearby, visibly shaking. Dr. Bell confirmed his omissions. Jonathan Reeves admitted his part in staging the haunting. No one attempted escape. No one attempted denial. The truth no longer needed defense. Poirot's explanation to the law inspector. Finch turned to Poirot. "You're certain," he said, "this was not an accident?" Poirot nodded. "The watch," he said. "The bruising, the rope, the angel. These do not form an accident," Poirot continued. "They form a decision." The motive clarified. "She acted out of fear," Finch said. Poirot inclined his head. "Yes," he replied. "But fear does not absolve responsibility, only explains it." Lady Eleanor's final words before being escorted away. Lady Eleanor turned to Poirot. "You believe I am evil," she said quietly. Poirot met her gaze. "No," he replied. "I believe you are human." She closed her eyes. "That may be worse," she whispered. Poirot shook his head gently. "No," he said. "It is what allows truth to matter." Edward's reckoning. Edward approached Poirot afterward. "I should have spoken," he said. Poirot nodded. "Yes," he replied. "But now you will live with knowing why silence is never harmless." Edward swallowed hard. That lesson, Poirot knew, would follow him far longer than any sentence. The angel removed. A servant carefully took down the silver angel. It was placed into an evidence box, a symbol of peace, now marked by truth. Poirot watched silently. Objects, like people, carried memory. A house emptied. Ashcroft Manor began to empty. Rooms, once filled with secrets, stood bare. No whispers, no footsteps, no fear, only echoes. Poirot stood at the base of the staircase. One last time. He looked up. 11:47. The time no longer haunted him. That had been answered. Poirot reflects. Hastings joined him. "Do you ever regret solving them?" Hastings asked quietly. Poirot adjusted his mustache. "No," he replied. "But I regret that they must exist." The case closed. Inspector Finch shook Poirot's hand. "You've done more than solve murder," he said. Poirot smiled faintly. "Have only listened carefully," he replied. A quiet ending before the end as Poirot prepared to leave, snow began to fall again softly. Mercifully, Christmas had passed, but its lesson remained. Truth does not haunt houses. People do. Part 10. Justice on Christmas. ing justice rarely arrives with drama. It comes quietly, like snow falling after a storm, covering what was broken, without pretending it was never there. A morning without ghosts. Christmas morning dawned pale and silent. Ashcroft Manor no longer felt haunted, nor did it feel relieved. It felt emptied of fear, of lies, of illusion. The decorations remained, but their meaning had changed. What once promised joy now whispered of consequence. Hercule Poirot stood by the window of his room, watching snow descend gently upon the frozen grounds. "Order," he murmured, "has returned." But order, Poirot knew, did not mean happiness. The departure. Lady Eleanor Ashcroft was escorted from the manor just after sunrise. She walked with dignity, neither resisting nor collapsing. Her confession had stripped her of fear. What remained was acceptance. Before stepping into the car, she paused and looked back at the house. "My brother loved this place," she said quietly. Poirot inclined his head. "And so did you," he replied. "That is why this hurt so deeply." She nodded once. The car door closed. The engine started. Justice, once invited, does not linger. Edward's silence broken. Edward watched from the doorway, his face pale, older than it had been days before. "I thought silence would save us," he said quietly to Poirot. Poirot shook his head gently. "Silence," he replied, "never saves anyone. It only delays truth, and truth always arrives with interest." Edward lowered his eyes. That lesson, Poirot knew, would follow him for life. The Manor restrooms were opened, curtains drawn, fireplaces extinguished. The house breathed again, not as a place of secrets, but as a structure of stone and memory. No whispers followed footsteps now. No shadows pretended to be more than shadows. The ghost had never existed, but fear had. And fear, Poirot reflected, was always the most convincing actor. Poirot and Hastings, Captain Hastings, joined Poirot on the front steps as the snow thickened. "So that's it," Hastings said quietly. "No ghost, no curse." Poirot smiled faintly. "There are always ghosts, mon ami," he replied. "Just not the kind people expect." Hastings frowned. "What kind, then?" Poirot gestured toward the house. "Regret," he said. "Fear, and love when it believes itself above. Consequence." The final reflection. Poirot adjusted his coat and looked once more at the staircase through the open doorway. 11, colon 47. The time no longer mattered. It had served its purpose. People believe mysteries are about clever tricks, Poirot said softly. But they are not. They are about choices. One moment, he continued, where someone decides they know better than truth. And truth, Poirot added, is never forgiving of arrogance. A lesson of Christmas as they prepared to leave. Church bells rang faintly in the distance. Christmas morning. A time of forgiveness. But Poirot understood something many did not. Forgiveness belongs to the heart. Justice belongs to the world. One does not cancel the other. Poirot's closing words at the gate. Poirot paused and looked back one final time. "This house will be quiet now," Hastings said. "Yes," Poirot replied. "But it will remember, and so should we." The end of the case. The car moved slowly down the snow-covered road. Behind them, Ashcroft Manor stood still, no longer a place of mystery, but a monument to truth revealed too late. Hercule Poirot closed his eyes briefly. "Christmas," he said softly, "has a curious habit. It awakens the dead. And sometimes," he added, "it awakens the truth." The end.